Welcome back to the channel. We're back out in the 924. We're back out in the 924 and it's a beautiful day, and I thought what better day to do an update on the car and give you guys a sort of top to tail of everything that I've done on this car since I took ownership of it back in sort of 2016 summertime. And it made sense to really give you guys a view of everything that I've done on this car since I've owned it and the different areas that I've tackled. And what I've done is really broken it into three areas. That is the mechanicals, the cosmetics, so the outside of the car, and the cosmetics on the interior, so interior, exterior and mechanicals. Now you might say that's generally the rule of three when you are restoring cars, but it's the easiest way. I looked at this car when I first took ownership and decided, right, these are the things I want to get done to get it back on the road and to a good known state so I can use it almost every weekend, every day if I wanted, but potentially do a couple of sprint races, hill climbs and just take it to general shows. So this is really an update around everything to expect if you are about to decide on a Porsche 924 and maybe it's a car that you're looking at that was similar to this one, which needed work, needed a bit of TLC to get it back to its sort of former glory. So let's start with the mechanicals. This is generally where you want to make sure that you're working with some solid detail in terms of the mechanicals themselves, that they're not completely written off. And from that perspective, I knew that the engine was very bulletproof on these, so I opted for the Porsche 924 2-litre NA. The engine itself can be traced way back to when Mercedes actually developed the engine before VW took ownership of the Porsche brand. And yeah, the engine has all shapes and sizes in terms of where it's fit into different cars over the years, but it traces its roots way back to Mercedes. So that being said, the engine being a 2-litre is a non-interference engine. It produces about 125 horsepower in its form for Europe. Being a 2-litre non-interference engine meant that if your timing belt does break, you don't have that dreaded fear of pistons and valves coming together and having a fight. So from that perspective, the engine itself is relatively bulletproof. It's not an engine that you can upgrade massively, to get huge amounts of new horsepower. There's a couple of decent things you can do, mainly a camshaft. A company called Noonan Camshafts actually do a nice kit for this car. It's a camshaft with followers. It's about 300 quid all in, and it gives you probably an extra maybe 10, 12 horsepower if everything else on the car is doing as it should. So from that perspective, it's an easy small upgrade that gives you also a bit of horsepower but better fuel efficiency as well. So let's just get through the mechanical side. I knew I had an engine that was pretty solid and bulletproof. The rest of the mechanicals, talking about suspension, torque tubes, clutch, all the bits that sort of fit in and around, I started with the torque tube and clutch system itself. So I did opt for a new refurbished torque tube. So they have 4 bearings within them. I got those refurbished, and the outside of the torque tube, so that was really good for the next 100,000 miles. There shouldn't be any issues there. And while I had that torque tube out getting refurbished, I also took the chance to actually put a new clutch in. Now, on taking the old clutch out, that one still had probably about 70% of its life, and I'm actually trying to sell that one on Gumtree. But that being said, it was just a peace of mind. If you're taking the torque tube out and all of that is exposed, you might as well put a clutch in. And at the same time, I also did the rear main seal, so everything from the back of the engine really is again good for the next sort of 50 to 75,000 miles. And those were, you know, main things that you should really do when you're looking at the mechanicals on this type of car. Equally, getting back to the gearbox, I've not really touched it other than change the fluid itself, so that is always a good thing to do on these cars. You never really know unless you've got it documented. I've got a good history on the car, but I could never really find if the gearbox oil had been changed. So again, it's one of those jobs that is just worthwhile in doing. So with that all done, I then turned my attention to the engine, and in particular the bottom of the engine. So I knew I had to upgrade the suspension on this car and refurbish it both front and back. So while I was about to do that job, the bottom of the engine is exposed. When you remove the front suspension, you remove the cross member, that allows you to get access to the sump, so the bottom of the engine. And on this particular car there was a leak. There was a leak also from the oil sump plug, but also around the gaskets of the sump itself, so it definitely needed changing. And I took that job over a weekend really to do, and it's a pretty simple job. I mean, there's you know, you methodically work through the nuts and bolts, but once you get to the sump itself, it's about 16-17 bolts that you remove. That gives you access to really getting the new gaskets in place. There's sort of rubber gaskets on either end, and then yeah, sort of a metallized type form with silicone that you can use for the gaskets along the side of the engine itself. And yeah, I opted to get that done, and while I had all those parts off, I actually took the time to refurbish them. So refurbishing the cross member, the sway bar, the bushings. I opted to upgrade with lower control arms with all the bushings. I didn't go with poly bushings because I just didn't want too much of a firm ride. But and that was the reason. Basically, I was going to be adding gas shocks to this car, which I opted for the full gas gold coilovers at the front with just the shock absorbers at the back, because it's a torsion bar setup at the back. So it wasn't about lowering the car, although I can lower the front. These cars sit pretty low anyway, and from that perspective, if you do want to lower the rear, you have to re-index the torsion bar itself. So if you know what you're doing back there, you can do it, but to be honest, these cars, as I said, sit very low. So once I put the coilovers on and adjusted them, I probably got a very, very slight nose dip, very much like Formula One cars of today. Nothing more than that, and it drives fantastically well. You can alter the rebound on both the front and the rear. So I've got a pretty firm setup on this car, thus I didn't need more firmness from adding poly bushes or anything like that. So from that perspective, I've got a really, really nice setup on the suspension, and I highly recommend Gaz as a supplier. They seem to have quite a wide range of different setups that you can apply to these cars, and 944s and so on. So with that being said, that was the front and rear suspension. I obviously tidied up where I could, refurbished parts front and back, bottom of the engine installed, I then turned my attention to the fuel system. So if you've been watching some of my videos, you would have seen that I had been going back and forth with the fuel system, really to find an issue of it not starting on a cold start. Now, you might start at the warm-up regulator, which most people would have said that's the place to start, and I would agree with that. I think what it also allowed me to do was actually start to really dig into what the Porsche 924 fuel system is, the K-Jet system, along with the airflow unit attached, understanding how it all works from the tank right through to the injectors themselves. So I have the double fuel pumps on this, one fuel pump in the tank and an external fuel tank, external fuel pump, and it gave me the chance to actually fit a lot of the right component pieces. So new fuel pump, new piping, which the previous piping on this car had, I guess the best way to describe it, had been butchered. So it really gave me an opportunity to renew that all to proper Porsche parts as it left the factory, tidy up and refurbish the accumulator, and just really check over all the piping from front to back, right up to the fuel filter which sat in the engine bay. So yeah, from the fuel filter you get into the K-Jet system, and understanding how all of that works through to the injectors was a big learning curve, but very, very useful in understanding how obviously the car works and how the fuel system works at its most efficient. So I took the opportunity to try and refurbish and clean a lot of that through my journey with the fuel system, including the warm-up regulator. There's some actually good information out there about this stuff that allows you to rebuild and refurbish. So I went through a lot of those steps to get the car running back to its former glory. Once I had gone through that, I also had a look at the top of the engine, just really making sure that a pressure test on the engine itself, when the engine wasn't starting, I went through those steps just to make sure nothing was amiss. I did have a sticking valve which caused one of the cylinders to look like they had like it was losing pressure, but ultimately once I had done cleaning up and got in there, the valve seemed to be working and operating much better. So whether or not that was just because it had been sat for a while, I'm not sure, but everything seems to be working as it should be now. I replaced the gaskets on the top of the engine, so the rocker cover gasket, did an inspection of the camshaft while I was there and the followers. You would expect a little bit of marks and scoring, maybe a little bit of wear on the lobes themselves. They were all pretty okay, to be fair. There was a slight wearing on a couple of them, but nothing that would cause any concern. And maybe this year will be a year that I'll actually do that job and add the new camshaft setup from Newnham. I then went on and did a full flush of the cooling system. I again hadn't got a record of when that had been done previously, so it made sense to give it a full flush. Did a video on that and refilled it with G48, so it's all good. Actually, before I started doing videos on the car, I did the water pump as well, so some of you were asking that on my last video on the timing belt. So yeah, I have fitted a new water pump, I've done the timing belt, and the only thing I've not managed to do is the front I guess seal, which sits within the oil pump itself at the front of the engine, where you have to undo the crank belt or crank bolt to get that. I just could not get the torque required to undo that bolt. It's torqued to some crazy number, so it doesn't look like it's leaking. I've kept an eye on it. Where I thought it I think there was just a lot of dirt and grime on the car around that front of the part of the engine. So with that in mind, and having kept an eye on it, and it doesn't look like it's leaking, it's not an urgent job, but I think when I get the next oil service done, I am going to get it done by the local Porsche specialist, just to get the stamp in the book, to help with the history, of course. And while they're there, ask them just to get that seal changed, just for good measure. That basically means that all the seals on the engine have been done, other than the head gasket, which I know is solid. There's no no cause for concern. The heating of this car, when I did the flush and the new coolant, I actually refurbished also the fan itself. So looking at the temperature now, it sits really around the quarter mark gauge. So if you had a full a view of the fuel tank, your quarter marker for your fuel, that's where I am on the temperature of this car as we're running along at sort of 50-60 miles an hour. So no concerns at all with heating. Even if I sit idling for a while, it will drift up just past halfway. The fan will kick on just after that, and everything is good. So yeah, I think it's a job well worth doing. It's a pretty easy one, draining the fluid and then flushing it through with the bleeder. I guess screw on the top of one of the pipes. It's easy to get all the air out, and yeah, it's a job worth doing. Once I did that, the timing belt, usual consumable service items I've done as well. So spark plugs, HT leads, distributor cap, all of that good stuff, air filter is all good. And one thing I recommend as a part of the mechanicals as well is just going round and going through any of the external earths and anything where electrical wires might be exposed to the outer elements, if that makes sense. They do tend to corrode, and they do tend to lose their sort of connection with whatever metal that they're meant to be connected with. So things like headlights not popping up, for instance, that could be as simple as the relay that sits as a part of the motor, or it could actually be that the connections that the brushes of the motor run across could be dirty and clogged up. So I had issues with my fog lights. It turned out to be, again, bad connections that I tracked down. It is a pain to track this stuff down, but ultimately, once you've cleaned it up and done, you know it's going to be set for the next 100,000 miles potentially. So I think from that perspective, it's job's well worth doing. That sort of completes, I guess, a lot of the mechanicals that I've done on this car, a fair amount, but as I said, the engine that I was working with was bulletproof and solid, so I've got no issues there. The car's done 92,000 miles, still drives fantastically well. Now, even better so with all of the stuff that I've upgraded and tuned. I guess the final touch in terms of the steering, I had this all realigned, four-wheel alignment, with having the steering rack off, doing the inner and outer tie rods, all of that good stuff, new suspension. I had to get all the cambers and the tracking and the toe and the thrust of the car all pointing in the right direction, because it wasn't. It was simple as that, and the guys at the Porsche specialist did a fantastic job. Realigned the rear, because that had all been off for the torque tube and so on, and also realigned the front, so the car drives straight and true. Really is a fantastic feeling, back to sort of Porsche factory spec, which is what they got it to. That 50-50 weight distribution and everything pointing in the right direction means that you can ultimately move the car around, and you have confidence that it's doing what you want it to do. So even if you haven't done all those jobs and you've had the car for a while, or there's no sign of the car having had a wheel alignment before, I do recommend it's worth it's worth the job, because you never can tell until you have it done that your car might be driving slightly out of kilter. So yeah, highly recommend that. was done, I guess in parallel I was doing the external cosmetics of this car. So I have had a respray. That full respray I kept in the original Copenhagen blue, which is what this car left the factory in back in 1984. It's a great colour. I mean, most Porsche, I guess, Porsches of the era back on the 924s were very popular in the whites and the reds. There doesn't seem to be that many in the darker blue. So it was a colour I really liked, and when I saw this one come up for sale, I pounced, and in the hope that the mechanicals were something I could work with, but equally that the body parts themselves weren't in dire need of restoration. So there was no rust on this car, either on the seals or any of the parts that meant I had to replace any of the body panels. So that is a really big thing. It was certainly something I wasn't sure, as we started digging into the car, you might find, because some of these things can tend to be hidden from the eye until you start moving bits and pieces around. So very happy to report that the car was in good enough condition that we can reuse all the panels, and it was a case of doing a bit of metal work and a bit of filler in the right places to bring it back to a smooth finish and give the car its almost factory look as when it left in 1984. So when I took the opportunity to get the respray, I also renewed a lot of the seals on the car. So rear hatch seal, sunroof seal, door seals, mirror seals, door handle seals, all of those are brand new. So it just meant that I never had to worry again for the next sort of 50 odd thousand miles that any of the seals would be perished to a point that you might find your car swimming in water. Once I had done a lot of, once we'd completed like the respray, I'm on to the interior of this car, and that's really where the next journey sits. I've been in two minds quite a lot with the interior of this car. Yeah, so the car has this great interior colour which is called grey beige. It comes with the Porsche logo embossed across the fabric, and it really complements the external colour of this car. So you've got the dark colour of the Copenhagen blue with the light sort of, I would almost call it beige, and those two colours go really well together and complement nicely. Unfortunately, trying to get this material has proved extremely difficult. Work in Germany, as WERK, they reckon that they ran out of that material several years ago. I've asked a whole bunch of different places with no avail. So there was potentially a company in the US that said that they had this type of material, but I was unsure if it was just cross wires or if they really did have it. So again, I have just been in two minds really about what to do. The seat bases have ultimately cracked between the vinyl and the leatherette and the material itself, which basically means that the bolsters and the seat foam need replacing as well, after years and years of, well, I'm guessing 37 years of backside sitting on the seats. So they need replacing, and I guess a good upholsterer could probably save a lot of what I've got to work with in terms of the material itself. Maybe replacing the vinyl to bring the seats together back to hopefully a former glory, but I've yet to find someone that can do that. I know there's some good ones out there, but I've just got to put in a bit of work and find out really if it's it's a job that they might want to take on. So with that, I've so far just put some seat padding down to save slipping into the different bolsters of the car itself. Yeah, so I think if I can find someone to fix these seats, I will opt for that option. And I haven't really considered changing the seats, other than maybe putting some race seats in this, just to use it now and again. But I'd like to try and keep the originality as much as I can on the car. So if I can find someone who can ultimately use the material that I've got and bring them back to former glory, that would be great. I've got some new seat belts which I've got to fit, that you would have seen me post. I think I'm running a 944 seat belt on that side and a 924 on this side. They are both sort of worse for wear, and so I'm running a 944 seat belt on that side and a 924 seat belt on this side. Both are a little worse for wear. They definitely need changing, so that's a job that I'll be doing very shortly. I have the usual cracks on the top of the dash, but certainly not as bad as many that I've seen. I've got 4 hairline cracks where the air vents are. It's a typical place where these go. To be fair, they build the character of the car, so I'm not too worried about that look. It's very in period, I guess. I do need the steering wheel recovered, hopefully matched in the lovely chocolate brown that I also have running around the door seals, or the door panels on this car, I should say, along with the air vents and the top part of the dash. There's a little bit of vinyl peeling on the glove box, but you wouldn't necessarily see it unless you were looking for it, as it's peeling at the bottom. All the gauges all work very well. I've got no issues there. Everything is doing as it should. The one thing I do want to replace is the stereo. So as expected over the years, this has ultimately had a few different stereo systems put into it. It's running some sort of Sony CD player at the moment. I found a nice couple of classic, what I would call modern classic stereos, so you can have that almost look of the Blaupunkt, which a lot of Porsches of the era came with, but in what I would call modern tech inside it, and that's what I'm going to opt for, because it's going to be a nice touch to have the sort of classic lines of an old stereo, but being able to plug in your USB for a charger, answer your telephone with Bluetooth and all of that good stuff. So they're not expensive. Again, 20 quid will get you a half decent one. It's not about ultimately having loud or blasting music in a car like this, because you want to hear the track of the car's engine, exhaust, and the transmission itself. So that's most likely what I'm going to opt for, and get that fitted as well. Interior wise, I think other than that, everything is holding together pretty well. There's nothing out of place or any cracks. Maybe some of the plastics could do with maybe a respray of some sort, but you'd have to get the colour match just right to make sure they don't stand out. The electrical switches and everything work well. I fixed my passenger electric window the other day, which you would have seen on my Instagram post. So other than that, everything is as it should be and working well, including the heater system as well. So that really is the interior side of the things. I guess one thing I forgot to mention, which is a major component of the car, is the brake system. So I have rebuilt all of the rear brake system on this car. So new drums, new cylinders. I opted to replace all the piping from the hard fix piping to the calipers and the drums with steel braided pipes. So again, they won't corrode, and they'll be good for the next 100,000 miles. The booster, and the system itself looks extremely clean. There's no what I would call over corrosion that's happened there. There's still a very firm feel on the brakes themselves, so I'm very comfortable with that. The only thing I do need to ultimately change is the front discs themselves, and that is going to be a job that is coming. It was one of the winter jobs, and it's the final touch, I think. Now that everything's driving straight and true, the one thing you do feel is whether your brakes, certainly the front brakes, the discs and pads, are at their optimal, and these certainly are not. There's a small vibration that happens, and I know that through the disc being slightly warped. So this car was sat for a little while. These discs tend to not enjoy ultimately getting left for a while and then driving with loads of dirt and grit on them, and I think maybe over time that's helped towards them warping, but I've managed to get new ones. The job of just changing the front discs on these cars is slightly more involved, just because they also carry the front wheel bearings, so it's something actually that I needed to do, because I've replaced the rear wheel bearings on this car as a part of the very first MOT that was highlighted as an area of concern, which I got done. So yeah, the front wheel bearings will be done along with the discs and pads, so that really will complete the full setup of the driving experience of this car, and yeah, I can't wait. So from that perspective, that covers the mechanicals, it covers the external, I guess, cosmetics of the car, and also the internal cosmetics of the car, and everything that I've done to date over the past sort of three and a half years to get this car back on the road and driving with a smile on my face, which is ultimately what you want from these cars. They're great little cars. There really is an enjoyment that is hard to find on modern cars of today. You're very, very connected with everything that's going on. You feel everything through your backside and through your hands on the steering, and I guess that's the joy of driving. You're fully in control of everything. There's no power steering, there's no computers on board telling you what's right or what's wrong. It really is man and machine. So with that, I'm going to carry on driving while the weather's good. I hope you've enjoyed this small update on everything that I've done over the years, and if you do enjoy the videos of the 924 and all the work that I've been doing on it and the work to come, then please subscribe, please follow me on Instagram, and some new videos will be along very soon.